In my commentary, kind of dialogue back and forth with Preacher Man 777 regarding what happens to those who die having not heard the gospel and therefore having not had faith in Christ, well, that's not necessarily one equals the other, because people who hear the gospel don't necessarily have faith in Christ. But I mean, regardless, it's people who both have not heard the gospel and who have not placed their faith in Christ. I'm being continually compelled by just my desire to understand this issue better and to be able to defend better against it, because I think it's a very wrong and very dangerous theology, even in maybe the diluted and harmless form that Preacher Man, his incarnation of this thought is, or wherever he's getting it from. I think it's reminiscent, and it kind of leads to an anonymous Christianity that I'll be talking about. That's no mystery as far as there are people that believe that nowadays. But I was reading further today, and I was reading Luke chapter 12. And chapter 12 is where Luke describes, catalogs Christ's woe to the Pharisees and those kinds of things. And he gives a couple of different parables of the man who had much and tore down the storehouses and built up more. And on that night, your soul's required of you. Who will now have what you had. This is kind of warnings of Christ. Early in chapter 12, Jesus says, "Don't fear those who kill the body and can do nothing else." But verse 5 says, "Fear those who can fear the one who can kill the body and therefore cast the soul into hell." So, but he goes on in verses 35 and following. He gives some description of what happens when Christ returns. Be in readiness, he says, and he paints pictures of the good servants and the servants who know the master's coming and are ready all the time, and the servants who know what the master says and are not ready. But he goes on farther, and this is important, I think. Let's see here. Verse 41 and following, I'm just going to read here for a few lines. Peter said, "Lord, are you addressing this parable to us or to everyone else as well?" And the Lord said, "Who then is the faithful and sensible steward, whom his master will put in charge of his servants to give them their rations at the proper time? Blessed is that slave whom his master finds doing so when he comes. Truly I say to you that he will be put in charge of all of his possessions. But if that slave says in his heart, 'My master will be a long time in coming,' and begins to beat the slaves, both men and women, to eat and get drunk, the master of that slave will come on that day when he does not expect him, and at an hour when he does not know, will cut him in pieces and assign him a place with the unbelievers." So I think we got here in verse 46, the description of what happens to those who profess Christ who were not saved. Arminians would say that they've lost their salvation, but I disagree with that, but that's neither here nor there for this point. But this says that people who know the commands of the Lord, yet do not act accordingly and obey, will be cut off, cut to pieces, and assigned a place to the unbelievers. And verse 47 says, "And that slave who knew his master's will and did not get ready or act in accord with his will receive many lashes." Okay? Somebody who knew the will of God but did not obey him will receive many lashes. Verse 48, "But the one who did not know it, or the will of God, and committed deeds worthy of a flogging will receive but few. From everyone who has been given much, much will be required, and to whom they entrusted much, of him they will ask all the more." I believe this shows in great detail that people who don't hear the gospel aren't going to be exempt from punishment. If you hear the gospel, you're liable to a greater degree because you've had a greater grace in the revelation of God. And Jesus likewise kind of says this when he's talking to the Pharisees, and the people of Israel. He says, if the words have been preached in the town of Sodom and Gomorrah that have been preached here today, maybe it's not Paul, maybe it's Paul, I forget who said it. I'll look at the reference, but the reference basically says this: if the gospel had been preached here, that was preached here, was preached back in Sodom, they'd still be here today because they'd have repented. The idea is that you have a greater grace than the people of Sodom did because they weren't even given the gospel. They were destroyed. But they were destroyed and condemned nonetheless. So verse 47, 48, and 49, verse 47, 48, excuse me, I think do a lot in dispelling the idea that those who, apart from, have never heard the gospel and obviously therefore have no faith in Christ, will receive punishment from God eternally based upon their sin. and it's not mitigated because of their lack of knowledge or lack of understanding or lack of revelation, but they'll be judged according to their sin. So it's a big issue, and that's why I'm so passionate about it.